Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Don't go petting down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, no, no. Don't go petting down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Now I just heard from a guy who heard from the guy next door to me. The girl he met just loves to pet and it fits you to a T. So don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me.
Apple box labels, the colorful graphics that once identified and promoted Washington state apples, have been rediscovered and rescued from old packing sheds, attic trunks, and warehouses. They are sought after as collectibles unique to Washington and treasured as nostalgic reminders of a bygone era. Washington's oldest fruit orchards date back to the mid-1870s. It was then that settlers began to follow the prospectors and miners to north central Washington and began to establish farms and towns. Apples were soon found to thrive in the Cascade foothills. The first commercial orchard was established sometime in the early 1880s. It was not long before Wenatchee, located in the center of the state, started billing itself as the apple capital of the world. Fruit crate labels were already well established as a very successful marketing tool for California oranges, and Washington apple growers quickly followed suit. Graphic illustrators adapted some of the same orange themes early on, but were soon inspired by the scenic beauty of the Pacific Northwest and began painting an idyllic, sometimes whimsical picture of a lush land filled with quaint alpine villages, flowing rivers, healthy children, and valleys brimming over with orchards of perfect apples. The apple labels were glued to the ends of wooden boxes and shipped throughout the United States by rail car.
Before the turn of the 20th century, they used to pick in bushel baskets, and but you can see how unpractical it is to try to pick a basket and then pile it. You can't do it. So some ingenious fellow decided he was going to make a wooden box that was just right. It'd hold one bushel, and you could handle it, stack it, wheel it around, and do all those good things. So we had to have some way to assemble it, and so they came up with a steel form. Wells and Wade Hardware made an awful lot of those, and one I used was, of course, made at Wells and Wade. But first off, the lumber is called shook, and consists of the ends or the heads like that, and then you have to have two sides and a bottom. Somebody came up with an invention called, this is called a stripper, and you put up a handful of nails, it falls down and lines them all up nicely for you. So I'll make an apple box here. When we made apple boxes, they didn't pay you by the hour, they paid you by the apple box. I thought, well, if I could increase my speed from 300 boxes in a day, I heard some guys would make 1,000 a day, so that kind of perked me up. So I used to go watch these guys that were these whirlwinds, and I decided I was going to copy them. And so I finally made 1,000 a day. So it was hard work, you know, just fast as you can go all day long, 10 hours. And if you want to work a little overtime and make up for maybe you only made 800 the day before, you can make an extra hour or so and make your 1,200, see? But you did that 6 days a week, and 10 hours a day, or 11, or whatever you want. And if you wanted to rest on Sunday, you can only make 500. Just go home and relax all afternoon. See how you pick those up? See, they're all lined up like that. I used to pick up a handful like that, maybe 10 or 12, because it takes 8 on each side in the bottom. So I'll go ahead and drive a few nails. You'd have to drive them in one blow, and we'll do that. Now you notice when I put the nail down, I hit it with the hatchet and stand it up. Then you can sink it in one blow. That's where 10 nails came in handy. See, I only had about 7 or 8. There, we have a completed apple box.
By the early 1880s, there were experiments in developing refrigerator cars. And by the time apples were shipped by rail, it was already common practice to use ice-cooled cars to get the apples to markets in the freshest condition possible. Some people now have amassed collections of more than 1,000 different labels, but it is almost impossible to know just how many different labels were produced. Some labels were used for only one season and then discarded. Almost every grower, large and small, had at least one label, and sometimes many different styles and kinds over the years. The apple box art helped sell apples until they were phased out when the hand-assembled wooden boxes were replaced by the more practical and economical cardboard carton. By the mid-1960s, the labels were all but forgotten. Many were hauled to the dump, but thousands survived to be discovered by lucky collectors. Collectors eventually started trading between themselves, and antique dealers discovered there was money to be made. The combination of collectible art and money was as delicious a prospect as a crisp red apple fresh from the tree. Most of the labels available never made it to the end of an apple box and are as perfect as the day they were printed.
Collecting has probably been in my blood. I think you are born with being a collector. And when I got into apple labels, it was a whole new world because they are so graphic and so pretty. And both my husband and I have been collectors of postage stamps. And as probably at least 75% of the people who are collecting apple labels also collect postage stamps. But when you have a little teeny thing and all of a sudden this beauty becomes bigger, it's much more fun to go out and seek them than just on an envelope or something. And so we got into the graphics of the apple labels, and once you get 2 or 3, then you got to have a whole bunch more. And then you start collecting different companies and different areas, and just go on and on and on. And because they were local history, and they were done by people that you know of anyway. Just there's so much to learn in the field of collecting apple labels. I started personally about 1970 when the museum was opening. They were given a bunch of materials like graders and actual machinery that were in the sheds themselves that were outdated. But I decided they had to have some color, so I went down to the sheds at Chelan Falls. And that's when they told me that I could have any I wanted, but not to break a bundle, which is about 800. And if you break them, take the string off, well, then they're on the floor. So they didn't want me to do that. So I started bringing home big gobs of them. And that was about the time I started in business. So I put them out on the counter and started selling them, 5 for $1. Then I would trade with other people if they came into the shop. There was one guy from Yakima, his name was Bob Hansen, and he was into the charcoal that went in the filters of the CA storage units, which was quite new in 1970. So he was all the way from the Yakima Valley up north, and he would stop by and he'd bring some of the Yakima labels. Well, then I had to have some more of those, and I'd trade him a pinch of his for a pinch of mine, and that's how that got started. So it just snowballed. First thing you knew, there was a lot of people in it, and people from California came up and bought up all the local labels and took them back to California. And just on and on and on. And here it is 35 years later, and I'm still doing it, still enjoying it, still enjoying the people that we see quite regularly that collect. And there's just such a world out there in the graphic arts field, in advertising. It's so much fun.
In my sophomore year of high school, I started at the packing shed packing with the people from California told me that I could use the end bins, which was the little apples, and they'd show me how to pack. And that's how I learned. And then they would give me half of what I made. I didn't make much, but I'd get a few cents out of it. At that time, the last time I packed, I think I only got $0.50 a box. If you can imagine, it took 100 boxes, you had $1.50. It took 200 boxes to make $3. And then they'd give you a bonus if you put up a good pack. Of course, I wasn't hired by them. The California packers put my packs through on their name. But that's how I learned to pack. Because you had to have them packed, and they went out on a car at night. The labels are slapped on as they were going through. Used to be part of them were dry. They tried to get them, but you couldn't get them dry because they were really wet. That paste was all over everybody. You had that big brush, and you had to slap that on, then slap that label on, and put the brush over and smooth it out. And the fellow that worked at that steady was covered with paste by night, you know, after working, because they had to go out there. They loaded the cars as you were packing. There was cars stood there all the time.
The apples were picked and put in apple boxes out in the orchard. And when you went out to pick up a load of apples at one of the ranches, it was frequently somebody on the ground handing a box of apples up to the truck bed, and then you stacked them 6 high and 4 wide and brought them down to the end of the truck. And the same thing when you loaded apples at the warehouse. You took them off the truck with a hand truck, 6 boxes at a time, sometimes 7 boxes high, which was above the height of the truck. The railroad ran clear up to Oroville, or pretty close to the Canadian border, and picked up apples, and that was how they shipped all of the apples at that time, were loaded into railroad cars. And they would be loaded out of the cold storage directly into a rail car.
During the Great Depression, when farmers were getting only 26 cents a box for their apples, some couldn't afford to pay 3 or 4 cents per label. Yet they couldn't ship without one, so they sometimes borrowed from a neighboring orchardist. Popular subjects of the time were recreated by the artists. A portrait gallery of Northwest Indians was created for brands like Red Man, Winoka, Siwash, Wenatchee Chief, Red Girl, and Skookum. Even a youthful Chief Joseph lent his regal endorsement to Wenatchee-grown apples.
Most of the themes on apple labels were pointed towards men because the men were the first buyers of the apples. They did this in big auction houses like in Chicago, where the salesman would come in and buy big lots, and if it had a pretty lady on the box, they looked at that before they looked at the one that had just apples, let's say. So that was what they first did, and then a lot of times in the big markets, grocery stores I should say, they would have them setting in the box and the label actually showed. So then later on they went to some images that women related to. But mostly it was men things like hunting scenes, hunting dogs, pretty scenics of a fishing river or like a big fish or animals that they might be hunting. Deer was a popular one. There was the wolf and the bears and on as far as animals go. But a lot of the growers wanted their child on the label, and they would do them as babies usually, or there was the Denison label that had his daughter on it at different stages of her life. Picture with a girl in a dotted Swiss dress, and then went to later, like the 40s dresses, so you could tell the difference in how it went.
Today, rare labels may command several $100s each. Common labels are still plentiful in antique shops and museums for a few dollars each. One of the earliest known labels, the rare Swan brand, was printed in the early 1900s by stone lithography. Bavarian limestones weighing up to 800 pounds each were etched with the design, a separate stone for each color, and printed individually with secret ink formulated by Dutch lithographers. Most of the Washington State apples were printed in Seattle by the Ridgway Lithography Company. Different colors were used to denote the apple grades: blue for extra fancy, red for fancy, and green for the C grade. As World War II came to a close, apple boxes were decorated with patriotic graphics, including the traditional Uncle Sam brand. Extensive collections of labels are on display at the Chelan Museum in Chelan, the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center in Wenatchee, and the Yakima Museum in Yakima. Of course, antique shops are a great place to find labels, with Carol Krim's Stage Stop Antique Shop at Lake Chelan being the premier place to get a collection started. From the valleys and orchards of Washington, the art on the end of an apple box has left an enduring history of the early days when Wenatchee was indeed the apple capital of the world.
I wrote my mother, I wrote my father, and now I'm writing you too. I'm sure of mother, I'm sure of father, now I want to make sure of you. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, 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 don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Don't go petting down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, 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 don't go petting down Lover's Lane with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Now I just heard from a guy who heard from the guy next door to me. The girl he met just loves to pet and it fits you to a T. So don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. No, 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 don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me.